All right. Welcome to another Founders Community Expert Talk. I'm here with Kelly, who is like the leader of team leadership. I'm really excited to hear from Kelly today. And I'm sure all of you are going to have a bunch of great questions and just she has I've talked to her multiple times. I have not regretted it once. So Kelly, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks for having me today. I'm super excited to chat with you about all things team leadership. I'm Kelly Featheringham, CEO and founder of Team Leadership Solutions. I help people work better together. I do coaching and training around pretty much any leadership topic, most often things like communication, time management, just team building in general. I work with small to mid-sized organizations, but even some bigger organizations with medium to small size teams. So I'm excited to talk about some leadership behaviors today that'll help you lead your teams, lead your people a little bit more productively. And I look forward to a productive conversation.
Awesome. And I think this is so important too, because so many times, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of different entrepreneurs, and they always come to founders community or they come to me and they say like, hey, this is the problem that I'm having. And so often the problems that they're having is one with the, the, their own leadership. Like I don't like most of the time I have to say like, hey, before you point the finger at all your employees or like your processes, just look in the mirror a little bit. Your communication might be a problem, and so I'm so excited. And I think you have some slides for us. So if you want to get started with those, I will share those, and we'll just be here.
All right, sounds good. So I want to jump in. I'm going to jump in with a little bit of death by statistics, and I promise I'll keep it short, but it is important just to kick it off with this because I think it gives us a little bit of a baseline to start thinking about some of the challenges that are out there when we think about all of the investments that are being made by organizations into training, into coaching, into developing their people, and how effective the training is, and whether or not we're focusing on the right things. So again, just some statistics here. And when I look at training over the last 5 years, this slide on the left hand side talks about the expenditure from 17 to 2022. I want to look at the last 3 years. You'll see it goes from 83 to 92 to $101 billion. My first takeaway is that's amazing. Organizations, especially through COVID and all of the challenges with switching to remote, they're taking training more and more seriously. They're taking personnel development. They're taking all of the things that help make their teams and their staff more powerful for them. They're taking it as a priority by spending this amount of money. But I also wonder the efficacy of what it is that they're training. And the reason why I look at that big number and think, wow, it's great that they're spending all of this money, but then I hesitate because I look at the table on the right, and in 2022, $12,500 per employee was spent because of poor communication. And you might say, oh, well, that's just poor communication. But in doing some deeper digging, I found that the majority of the training that's being done is on, if I can find my slide here, is on communication training from 2021 to 2022. So they're spending $100 billion on training. Most of it in the last 3 years 2 years has been on conflict resolution, communication skills, and presentation skills. All, in my opinion, fall in the realm of communication. And communication continues to be one of the most costly challenges that organizations are finding with their employees. So it makes me take a step back and wonder what's the disconnect here. Obviously, organizations are willing to make the investment, and they are, but it's not hitting the mark. I guess you could argue that maybe it was $18,000 or $20,000 prior to that, but I couldn't find any data that supported that. If anything, the cost of bad communication, when I was studying the numbers, went from about $7,000 up to that 12 over the last 3 years. So communication is getting worse. One of the challenges that I think, obviously, with again with the pandemic and switching to more remote work, more hybrid work, it really put a lot of stressors on the way that we traditionally interact with our colleagues, the way that we manage our people, we follow up with their activities and their responsibilities, even just having general check-ins to make sure that people are okay, making sure that they're working at the capacity that they're able to, they have what they need, the tools they need, the instructions they need, so that they can be efficient and effective in what it is that they're doing. But still, we're still having problems with the communication piece.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting how it's very clear that post-pandemic and everyone going remote, the costs went up. And we need to teach people how to communicate when they're not sitting next to each other in an office. And I think it's so prevalent, especially for entrepreneurs, right? Who are one having to do a remote business for the first time, but then also having to figure out how to do like a remote team building or remote like management or all of that for the first time. So I can definitely see why organizations are increasing their spend, but I have the same question as you is of like, why, what are they spending it on? Like, have you like, I'm sure you've done research on like what there's like, what are they just terrible courses and classes and like seminars or what's going on?
I don't know that they're terrible. I mean, anytime we're learning, we're growing, hopefully, in some respect. I think that one of the challenges, and I often with clients, I use the example, I spent a long time in government, and government has a lot of training programs that you can take. You get a certain budget every year as an individual. You can take all kinds of classes as long as they fit somewhat in your lane. You can sign up for them. And I took some really great training classes, but I would get back to my office and a lot of them were not applicable to what I was doing, either because of processes or protocols or security concerns, things like that. There were a lot of things that I learned that, quite frankly, I use more now than I could use then because it just didn't apply. So I think sometimes we apply blanket training or blanket processes or principles to people that they're not going to be able to use it. The other challenge is the examples that we use a lot of times are very different. When I do training classes with folks, I have a lot of experience and I can bring a lot of scenarios that will make you chuckle, but they may not be something that you'll ever experience. So for me to talk about those things and try to draw parallels, sometimes it can lighten the topic and they can see it, but it's really hard to put that into practice when they take it back to their office and try to use it. I try to have my folks bring scenarios and situations that they're experiencing on their day to day, and then we use the principles and the different leadership styles, skills, all of those things to apply them to their scenario. Because I think that sometimes, depending on what kind of learner you are, it's really hard to make that pivot of, well, I understand the concept here, but I'm not sure how that's going to work for me tomorrow when I have to actually try this.
Right. Right. And I also see so many issues with entrepreneurs that are having to hire for the first time.
Mm.
Like before they even get a chance to be a leader, right? They're hiring for the first time in a remote world, which is just tough. Um, so everything from writing that job description and identifying those needs to interviewing and then hiring and then training and then the actual leadership and coaching afterwards. I see so many entrepreneurs having trouble with that on almost every step of their tripping, almost every uh, step of the way there.
I think it's challenging. If a lot of entrepreneurs that I've met haven't worked in other places before being an entrepreneur. And I think there's pros and cons to that. I had a long career before starting my own business. So I had the opportunity to learn from other people and absorb those experiences, learn from other managers, figure out what a job description looks like when you're writing it, figure out what an interview is supposed to be. I had that opportunity to be trained in those things. So now when I do them, I've got the training. Whereas if you haven't had that experience, you're kind of trying to figure out, well, this is the type of person I would want to hire. This is what I would like them to do, and trying to piece that together without any functional experience. And you can certainly find lots of resources online now to research, maybe watch YouTube or LinkedIn Learning, things like that. There's a lot of great resources out there to learn. But I do think that it can be a stumbling process. I mean, even for me as an entrepreneur, the pieces that you don't learn in working for others, I totally fall on my face with those, because I have to reach out to my community groups like yours, where you're leveraging the skills and the knowledge of other entrepreneurs that have had experience in different things than you, and making sure that you're open to collaboration and learning, because none of us know everything, right? A lot of us know a lot of different things. So together we can do a much better job and save ourselves a lot of time, money, and aggravation.
Definitely. Okay, I'll let you keep going.
No, it's great questions. So to follow on to the communication, you had asked about what are they training. I wrote a book last year about maximizing team performance by using these 3 behaviors that I'm going to talk about just briefly here: assumptions, boundaries, and communication. And the impetus for the book was based on so many conversations where I just felt they just kept coming up over and over and over again. And we make assumptions every day. All day long, we make assumptions, and we don't make them to be mean. I actually posit in the book, and I feel this way still today, that we make assumptions to take care of other people. We don't want them to feel stupid. We don't want to let them think that we don't believe in them or don't feel that they're up to the task, things like that. We make assumptions to protect ourselves, because we might say, oh, well, I'm not going to say that I don't know this, because someone would think that I'm dumb or inexperienced or not worthy of whatever opportunity that's in front of me. So when we look at making assumptions and the challenges that we have in the office or on a virtual scenario, if you've got a virtual team, how many times a day do we make assumptions about what the other person is thinking or feeling or understanding? I would argue that it's many, many times a day, and we're gonna talk through the 3 here and how they kind of bump up into one another, and they almost amplify and fight one another. Boundaries is the next one. We hear so much about work-life balance. Everybody's worried about work-life balance, but I look at boundaries from a different way. Boundaries are kind of how we teach people how to treat us. From something as simple as, I'd like my name to be pronounced this way, or I'd like to be called Miss instead of Ms. I'd like my office door to remain open or closed. I'd rather you text me than email me, things like that. And as leaders, so many of the boundaries that we set every day, we allow to be eroded on a regular basis, because we don't want to have difficult conversations, because you think, well, maybe I'm pushing back, or maybe I'm being a pain in the neck, maybe I'm being a grouchy boss. But anytime we set a boundary and then let someone not observe it and don't say anything, not only does that person get confused, and it almost starts to erode the trust there, because you're not trustworthy. If you're saying one thing, but you're allowing another, which is it that they're supposed to follow? Plus, then you've got the other people that are observing. I like to use the example of a meeting. Say you have a regular team meeting and you set it for 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, right? And in the beginning, everybody shows up at 10 o'clock. And hopefully, as a leader, you're showing up at 10 o'clock too, because we lead by example. But everybody shows up the first time. Do they show up prepared and ready to go because they're curious and they're interested? Then the next week, maybe you've got a few stragglers that come in a couple of minutes late. Then you've got other people the next week that can't make it. And it wanes over time. But if you are to say to them on the very first time that people are late, it doesn't have to be a very intense conversation at the end of the conversation, at the end of the meeting. Maybe you just say, don't forget, we start promptly at 10. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I'll try to get you out of here as early as I can, but we need to start on time. So please be here. Make every effort. Something like that. Because again, you're being consistent in your messaging. And I think so often, again, we make assumptions that we're going to insult somebody or hurt their feelings. And we allow those boundaries to become very flimsy on the edges, which then breaks down the trust and the understanding of what your expectations are from your people or your team. And then the communication piece is the piece that ties it all together, because so often we are not clear in our communication. We don't ask for feedback. We don't ask for people to repeat what they heard. And I'm not talking about, now please report back to me what I just said. I want to make sure that you got it all down, but just simple open-ended questions, something along the lines of, did you understand what I'm looking to get out of this, or how are you going to start this project, or anything other than, do you have any questions? Right? Because you ask that question and people are automatically, oh no, I don't have any questions. And meanwhile, you can see the wheels turning and they've probably got 20 questions, but for whatever reason, they're making assumptions that you think they understand it, so they don't want to be stupid. They don't want. So you see how it becomes this web of these three things that just fight against one another. When we take the time to be thinking about the challenges each day and taking a second to think, okay, what assumptions am I making in this moment that could be contributing to the challenge? What boundaries are not in place, or am I not enforcing, or were never there in the first place, that I could do now? And how could I have been clearer in my communication? How can I be clearer about it now and make sure that I'm sure that the other person knows exactly what it is that I'm looking for or that I need? Putting those all
Okay.
together.
Yeah, I love what you said about we're making assumptions to take care of other people. Because I think in so many trainings and so many um, like just educational material, we hear so much of like you're making assumptions because you're this or you're that, and so often we can't speak for everyone, but so often we're making assumptions saying, I'm trying to take care of this other person. I'm trying to take care of these employees. Um, and I think it's so, I loved the way you put that of, I, we're making these assumptions to take care of other people, but that's not always the case. Like we might be hurting them and ourselves and the rest of the team because we're trying to make all of these decisions ourselves. And I think as entrepreneurs, we're doing that so often where we have to try and think 8 steps ahead, which means we have to make a lot of assumptions. And we almost have to catch ourselves of like, no, I'm trying to read this person's mind. And no matter how much I think I can't do that. So that was really interesting.
No, it's so true. We can't all be Yoda, right? I mean, we have to understand. And someone pushed back on me, I don't know, a few months ago and said, "Well, you're talking about a leap of faith. You have to just have faith." And I really had to think about that for a little bit and wonder if I was conflating the two, but I see them as two very different things. A leap of faith and giving people the benefit of the doubt is meaning that their intentions and that they're showing up planning and willing and wanting to give their best. Whereas assumptions really has to do with their thought process, their intellect, their capabilities. They are really very different. So you can still be giving someone the benefit of the doubt. And here's where it complicates things, because if I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you're not going to make assumptions, and you're going to give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm not going to make assumptions, and I'm going to use my communication skills and clear boundary setting to make sure that we're both showing up, not making assumptions, but assuming that we're both going to do our very best.
Yeah. And I love how you map this out because I keep going through these different scenarios of like, okay, so I'm making assumptions and therefore setting boundaries based on those assumptions or vice versa. And then the assumption was never correct in the first place. And it would have all been fixed if I communicated properly. And there's just like this endless like back and forth between all three of those. Um, and I think that, no, I love how you did this. I think one thing that I see a lot with um, entrepreneurs, especially in that their first stage, is you're a solopreneur, and very oftentimes you're a solopreneur, and those things are still happening, but they're happening with yourself. So like the assumptions that you're making about how other people are perceiving and feeling, and you're making a ton of assumptions through your sales process and your marketing and all of this. And then your boundaries, you have to set boundaries with yourself for the first time in a lot of cases. And that's not like, you're making assumptions based on how much you need to work and not work and all this other things, and then how you communicate with yourself, let alone your customers. I All right. I'm gonna stop talking because you're
No,
gonna respond to all of that. But
it is. No, and it's a really great point for solopreneurs, because I think that what's some of the most important things that we do are market research, or we do uh, just the different things to kind of figure out what our niche is going to be, where our audience is, all of those different things. And a lot of those are time consuming. And when you're starting, it's like, no, I need to just dive in. So I'll just make assumptions about who all these people are. And like you said, setting boundaries with yourself and making sure that we're being intentional about, you know what, I really don't want to do that because it sounds labor intensive, or it sounds really uncomfortable for me to have to go and ask strangers these questions and they're not going to answer me. So I'll just make assumptions about what it is. But like you said, then that messy web happens, because now you're 3 steps forward and your communication is totally off base. Then you've got all this going on in your head because, oh, well, no one responded to my email, no one's liking my posts, no one's hiring me because I started off with the assumptions in the first place instead of going through the different things.
right.
So yeah, look, I mean, we make assumptions in our personal life. We make good and bad boundaries in our personal life. We use communication. I mean, these 3 behaviors resonate through our days from start to finish. I think that one thing, and I talk about it in the book, is to, like I said, anytime you have a challenge, whether it's work or not, solopreneur, in a big organization, I find that if I had thought about this 10, 15 years ago, there are so many different situations where if I had just taken a step back and thought, what am I doing here? Ask myself a few questions, because I think that we're often moving so quickly that we're problem solving at the speed of light. We're answering, we're solving, we're moving forward. But sometimes to take that beat and to ask ourselves a few questions just to make sure that we are really going down the path, really thinking in the way that we should be thinking, it'll save us so much time in the long run. But the immediate cost of stopping and losing momentum feels so insurmountable that we often, oh no, I'm not going to do that. We'll just, it's got to be right. It's fine. I just keep moving forward. But the cost at the long end there is a lot of rework. And certainly with organizations, when you're talking about training employees, whether you're a small business and you've hired your first person and you're asking them to think about solopreneurs, right? What do you typically hire a VA to start with, or maybe a marketing person, something like that. And you're trying to train them and you're making all these assumptions about what they know or how they understand what you want them to be doing. Then they give you all of this stuff. Money's at a premium at that point. Now you spend all this money on this person who's going to come back and get frustrated with you because you weren't clear about what it was that you needed from them or how you wanted it. Didn't think through exactly what the boundaries would be on your timeline, make sure that they know exactly what the expectations. So it can be really costly.
Definitely. And I can see how like all of these things, even if you were to do a training on communication, which it sounds like a lot of these organizations are, they're just pouring billions of dollars into communication training, but they're not working on boundaries or assumptions, that those will just, like you said, create a messy web. And no matter how good you are at communication, if you're really good at communicating, but you have a lot of assumptions, you're not so good at communicating, so I can definitely see how this can get muddy really, really fast.
Yes. Well, and I think when communication is not working, we get frustrated too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how many times have in a day, if you're talking to somebody and you're trying to get across to them something and they're just not getting it, instantly it's like you feel like that 5-year-old who's asking for a cookie and they can't understand you, right? It's like, why aren't you getting this? How can I reframe this? How can I make it clearer? And that snowballs. And the boundaries thing, again, breaking down the trust with your employees, that a lot of these things snowball over time, because it might be okay in the short term for today. Okay, well, we'll get over it here, but we get to the next and the next. And when these things keep happening, it really starts to erode the cohesion that you're feeling with the team or the person that you're leading. And that I think moves on to the piece of the maximizing the team performance, because I think we underestimate the long-term effects of short-time challenges. It may feel like just a small issue today, but when those are happening over and over, I mean, if you've ever worked on a team where nothing worked, it was manageable for a few days, but after time, people just start to get frustrated, and then they get grumpy, and then they get short with one another, and then all the other pieces start to fall apart too. So if you kind of bring it back to the beginning and make sure that at least you've got some kind of clear process and way in which you can talk to one another and combat those assumptions and reinforce those boundaries, then it helps to build a stronger foundation, so that when you do have the bumps and the challenges, at least you've got a strong base. And then you can come back and say, now, where did we go wrong here? Where did we veer off the target? How can we bring it back on the track?
Definitely. And yeah. And I think there's so many scenarios too where, I mean, I've quit jobs simply because one time my boss assumed what I wanted out of that position and they never asked. I was like, no
Right.
need for me to tell you. I
But
will just
now,
bid you adieu.
were you assuming that he didn't want to know what you thought?
I did, exactly.
I mean, and
So,
that's the challenge, right? Because again, it goes on both sides, and then it escalates back and
mhm.
forth. It's really catching.
Right, right, definitely, definitely. All right,
I think
more.
that for sure. So adaptive oversight is, and it's funny because this month is micromanage month for me and my social media stuff, as I want to talk about this a lot because I keep hearing from people how much they hate micromanagers, and it sets my hair on fire, because I think that micromanaging has gotten such a bad rap. And yes, micromanagers, we've all had that person that's looking over your shoulder, constantly telling, oh, change this, happy to glad, all of that. That's not what I'm talking about. Adaptive oversight is kind of my version of micromanaging, but I talk about it in the book as it being magic, because we've all had that manager that was a micromanager, but we never knew it. It was like they were a magician. They were always there with the safety net to catch us. They made sure we had what we need. They made sure that we understood what it was that our objective was. They were just there, kind of like that helicopter parent that you never know is around you, but you always feel supported and looked out for and had everything that you need. And that's kind of what adaptive oversight is, in contrast to micromanaging. Getting to know your employees, really understanding what makes them tick, what motivates them, what demotivates them is very, very important for managers to know. How they learn, listening to them. And when you ask the questions, actually listen to hear what it is that they're saying. Because I think that the more we ask our employees, it's a learning process for us to get to know, okay, this person is not going to need a lot of oversight. They're just not. They came in, they know their job, they're very clear on it, they've regurgitated it back to me, we've had a conversation, they know exactly what I want. We have similar styles. And when they produce a product or task or whatever it is that you're getting out of them, it's on point. So they might need a little bit less oversight. Whereas you might have somebody that's new to a career, especially, again, bring it back to the solopreneurs and the entrepreneurs. A lot of times we're hiring junior people because they're less expensive. We're able to train them the way that we want. We're giving them an opportunity, like we have an opportunity, making sure that they have the level of support that they need, and be constantly changing, right? You may hire somebody in the first couple of weeks. They may need you to be on them every day because they have a lot of questions. They're just not sure. And when I say that, managers look at me, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to manage somebody like that. But it won't be forever. I mean, it might be, and if it is, then that's a whole nother conversation, right? But it shouldn't be like that forever. In the beginning, you're getting to know one another. You're understanding, hey, I like Times New Roman versus Arial font, So if you're going to build a slide deck for me, these are the fonts that I need for you to do. So I don't have to go in there and change it. It may sound like micromanagement, but getting to know what you expect and understanding what they expect in return so that you can kind of find that balance of how you're going to work together. And then I say adapt, 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 because I think that as the life cycle of you with that employee or that team, you're constantly going to be changing. You're constantly going to be either taking your foot off the pedal of the oversight or leaning into it, depending, are you all learning something new? Everybody might need a little more support when you're all learning something new. Maybe you've got a new software launch or something like that, and everybody's learning. Everybody might need a little more care and feeding. If you're switching to a remote role, some people need you to check in on them and say, hey, is everything okay? And I key on that one, particularly like over COVID, people were really checking on a lot of people. You heard about it on the news. That was all over social media. Check on your people. COVID's over now. Managers aren't checking on their people anymore. And I don't think it's because they don't care anymore, but they figure, oh, well, COVID's over. There's nothing to check. But if you're checking on your employees every once in a while and you know kind of what the general temperature is of how things are, it really makes a difference in you being able to understand when there's a problem before there's a problem. A lot of times managers have to be reactive because they aren't aware that they're headed for a challenge. Whereas if we are engaged with our employees, not in a micromanagement over your shoulder, but just a, hey, let's chat for 5 minutes a week. And if there's nothing to report from work, then, hey, what's your plans for the weekend, right? What have you been out to any good restaurants lately now that we're able to go out and about? Something like that, but just to check in, because employees, like children, will broadcast to you without you realizing what's going on. You can see the changes in their behavior. If they're acting out or if their temperament changes, just a quick phone call to, hey, is everything going okay with you? They may not want to share, but the idea that you reached out and checked in carries a lot of weight for many employees. I'm not going to cast the broad strokes that it's everybody, but for many employees, just that they checked on me. They cared that something was going on. I didn't want to share what it was, but somebody's looking out for me. And if it might be something where I don't know, for example, say maybe they're having troubles at home and it's going to mean that they're not going to be able to give their all at work. Maybe that new project is not the one that you're going to give to that employee right now because their bandwidth is a little bit challenged right now. Again, preemptive instead of reactive, and making decisions based on what you know your employees' capabilities are, and keeping that dialogue open so that you're not making assumptions about, oh, they're grumpy, so I'm not going to give them the good project. You know, because you've had a conversation, they told you they've got a lot on their plate. They can't handle the big project. So kind of tying that all back together to the assumptions and boundaries, making sure that we're being respectful in our oversight, but incorporating some kind of relationship building with our employees. We focus so much on networking, like how many hours a week do we all spend on LinkedIn building our external network? What about building our internal network and making sure that we're continuing to nurture that?
Yeah. And I think what a lot of people, especially solopreneurs, want, I am guilty of this throughout the years of hiring someone and almost wanting them to be like a co-founder and being like, I don't need to train you, just come in and fix all my problems. And if you're not able to sit there and train someone and and that's why they say training's expensive, and that's why they say like onboarding and like all of this is a costly task. But if you're not putting the work in, you're just ending up costing yourself even more money and more time. And two, like, if you like, and I think it goes back to that job description and making sure everything is not perfect, but as close as you can get before you hire that individual so you can train them effectively. If you're a solopreneur and hiring someone that's relatively entry level and junior, you have to train them. I see so many times that people are saying, like, hiring someone saying, I need you to handle all the marketing. I have no idea what I'm doing. And like, it's just, if you're gonna hire, like, then you need to hire an agency who's been there and done that, or you need to open your checkbook. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, yeah, and you've mentioned the job wreck a couple times now, and I think that particularly for small business or solopreneurs, that first hire, that first two hires, we do want them to be a jack of all trades. We don't want, because it's almost like you don't know what you need them to help you with, and trying to refine that and figure out what exactly makes sense for you to hand off, and what would be most helpful for you so that you can focus on the business instead of being in the business, or yeah, in
Yep.
the business,
Mhm.
right? So making sure, and even just in discussing, and there's no reason why, particularly for a solopreneur, I don't think there's no reason why that can't be a conversation with the potential hire and say, this is a rough estimate of what my job description is, because I'm not exactly sure right now. These are the things I'm thinking. If you have other thoughts, other ideas, I want this to be an interactive experience here where we can talk about it. I'm not going to guarantee that you can do all the things that I want. And if that's what you need, then this might not be a good fit for us. But how can we come up with some kind of an understanding of, these are the baseline things I need you to do. And then we can talk about other things. You bring different skill set to the table, kind of like you said, a co-founder. It's almost that collaborative community, which since COVID, it seems like there has been a lot more opportunities for collaboration, and that just be maybe my timeline of when I got into entrepreneurship shortly before COVID. But it does feel like people are more interested and willing to find communities where we can lean on and leverage one another's strengths and abilities and experiences just to brainstorm. 'Cause I mean, I know for me, one of the most valuable things is just to be able to say things out loud. I mean, the dog always says everything sounds great as long as I give him a treat, right? So, I mean, he's not a very good, not a very good sounding board for me. So having a conversation with other people and saying things out loud so they can say, did you think that through? That doesn't sound right. But you have
Definitely.
to be open to the feedback too. That's the other piece. Some of us, sometimes it can sting when someone says that's a terrible idea. What do you think?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that on your last bullet there of, like, the adapt, 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 I think the most successful entrepreneurs do this really, really well. Um, However, when I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, I think there's a book that's even titled "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." So they've reached, like, the $1 million mark, or they hit their first couple revenue goals, and they're starting to bring in talent, and they kind of look around and say, it's my way or the highway. Like, I'm gonna micromanaging, and even I've seen CEOs do this all the way up to they're making like $20 million a year, and they're sort of looking around, and they hired all these incredible people, all these high salaries, and they look around and they don't let anyone make a final decision other than themselves. And I think that adapt, adapt, adapt is so important, because adapting and being able to think on your toes is what got a lot of the founders listening to this to where they are. But that also means that adapting to let go just a little bit. And yeah, Jonathan said it best: don't kill the innovators. Like, just making sure that you're adapting to who you're bringing on the team. Like, your team is going to adapt. It's not going to stay in this box your entire journey of entrepreneurship.
It's true. I think change is one of those things, right? I mean, there are folks out there that are good with change. I'm kind of a proponent of change, just because it's always interesting to see where it's going to go. Sometimes it can be bumpy and uncomfortable, but in general, changing things up has always been something that I found interesting and exciting to a certain extent. But I think that it does present some anxiety, particularly, I mean, when we're talking about entrepreneurs. This is your baby, right? You've created this organization, you created this business, you put your blood, sweat, and tears, and every last dollar for some of us, into creating something out of nothing, and you have a vision for it. So being able to hand that off and let someone else make decisions, I can see where that would be very daunting. But at the same time, there is that, and again, I'm the consummate team girl, right? I'm always going to come back to that strength in numbers, and that broader idea pool of all of the different things that we bring together. I like I said, I have a lot of experience, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to a lot of the people that I collaborate with, and vice versa. We all bring so many different things, and when we can ask questions and hear, we don't necessarily have to implement everything, but when we're able to really hear what other people's suggestions are and take that feedback and receive it and analyze it and figure out what pieces, parts, or all of it are going to work well for us, it's amazing, I think, how much further, how much faster we can get. I know, well, I mean, for me personally, anytime I'm doing something by myself, it takes 3 times longer than if I'm working with other, because you can't think of everything when your head is down. When somebody else is looking around, and they're going to see the obstacles before you are, they're going to be able to figure out what ways you could possibly go, kind of that choose your own adventure, right? They're going to be able to say, you could do these different things. Why not think about it this way? But
Definitely.
we have a vision sometimes. So it's like, well, that's not what I was thinking. But then when you think about it, if we can absorb even part of it, I think is really, really very useful.
Definitely. Definitely.
So any other I think that's my last slide. So I think we're good.
Oh, okay.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. Just connect. Yeah.
Very cool. So one question that I had is, and this goes back to, I've been hinting on this a little bit, is how can someone prepare themselves? Because we do have a lot of solopreneurs and founders community. How can someone prepare themselves to be a great leader when they haven't hired someone yet? Like, what can if I'm a solopreneur, what can I be doing now because it's a muscle. How can I strengthen that muscle if I don't have a team to do that with? What would your advice be there?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, I think that to start, and I'll tease this out. I put it on social media. I've written another book, and it's all about leading yourself. It'll come out later this year. And we're all given one person when we're born to lead. So the idea that any of us can't be a leader or don't have the opportunity to lead, in my opinion, doesn't exist. We all get to lead one person. So as the solopreneur, we start with leading ourselves. We start by setting an example for ourselves. How do you want to show up every day for work? How do you want to show up in the products that you're creating, in the conversations that you're having, in the systems that you're putting in place, in the schedule that you're keeping to, all of those things? Because those are, I think you mentioned, they're muscles that you're building, and they're routines and habits that we're building. So the better foundation that you can create just leading yourself and creating that foundation, when you bring somebody on with you, they're going to watch you. They're going to see how you're handling things, how you're talking to people, how you're interacting, your responsiveness, how quick do you respond to other people, how thorough are you in when you prepare for different things. These are all different ways that we kind of set ourselves apart. It also, I think it builds our own sense of confidence. And I think we see on LinkedIn a lot of times and other social media about our influence, right? Being a source of influence or institutional knowledge in different topics, right? To a certain extent, the way we lead ourselves gives that back to ourselves. If I don't know anything and I'm not taking the time to learn it, at the end of the day, when I put my head on the pillow, I know that I didn't really do what I was supposed to do. I know that I don't want to dive too far over into imposter syndrome, but I think that some of the foundations for how we show up every day for ourselves is how good we feel about the effort that we're making. Nobody else knows how hard we tried today, but we know. And if we know that we gave our best each day, then I think that we show up differently because we know we're giving it our all. It may not be knocking it out of the park. We may not be making $2 billion, but we're giving our best each day. So that kind of builds that foundation so that when we do start bringing people on, they're going to get that energy. They're going to feel that because we're showing up that way. And not everybody is wired to give their 150%. Some are only wired to give 60, some are only wired to give 75. But I think that it's much harder for you to show up and not give 150 when you're around somebody that's given 150. So maybe you're normally a 50% person, but you're around this person. I mean, think about the people that you interact with. It's like they inspire you to be better because they're being better every day.
Definitely. And I think, okay, so I thought of something fun we could do. And I'm
Okay.
putting you on the spot here. So if it's not as fun as I think it is, you just let me know and you can
Okay.
go down a rabbit hole and I won't stop you. So I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, I would say the phases of like a company's growth are like that first employee. And then you kind of get up to 5 employees, and then you actually are like 3 to 5 employees, you have a team, right? And then 10 employees. Now you might even have 2 separate teams doing 2 different things, and then you have to bring them together.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're up to like 20 employees and you have multiple teams and like a whole company culture. And then it just grows from there. So I would love to go through the phase. We don't have to go through like a deep phase, but I guess I would love to hear more about the common mistakes that you see people make at each stage. So like if I'm hiring my first employee, what are common mistakes that you see people make?
I like this question. Okay. So for hiring one person, I think not treating that person like a partner, not treating that person like a part of the family. They're going to work with you. They're working on your baby. They're basically family at that part. I mean, I'm not saying to be unprofessional, and I'm going to contradict myself when we get to the next one. Okay. But I think when you first bring that first person on, at least in what I've seen, is this person's going to know everything about your business over time. You could probably wall them off, but if you really need them to help augment all of the random things, you need them to have a good understanding of everything overall so that they can kind of plug the holes, because that's basically what they are. Like when you look at virtual assistants, they do a lot of little things, and they may just start with doing emails, but they often pick up a lot of little random things. So I think for the one person, that would be it. Certainly set your boundaries. Make sure that you're being intentional about that, because they're not family. They don't need to know everything, but not being too protective of making sure that they are understanding what you're going for and bringing them along, helping them feel passionate about the mission, because it is still only a team of 2, but you still are on your mission and building everything around that mission and getting them excited to be on that journey with you.
Definitely. Okay. What about like 3 to 5 employees?
3 to 5, I think, is tricky because so they're going to be doing more defined roles, but I think they're still going to be wearing a lot of hats. So making sure that they understand, if your goal is to get to more people than 3 to 5, that this is a transition, that this is not set in stone, that just because you come in and this is your role, be cautious about titles. Because I see this a lot. Be very cautious about titles, because not everybody, a lot of people are very worried about titles and stuff. So in order to bring them in, they want a fancy title. That's great. But once the organization builds, I mean, who knows what they're going to end up as, and making sure that they understand that this is all a little bit fudgeable, because we're in a transition phase. You're helping me bridge this gap until I get to the 5 to 10. And then because you're a founder with me, or because you're here from the beginning, certainly I'm going to take good care of you. But what you're doing today may not look the same in a year or 2 years or 3 years, depending on how well you help me grow.
A director is usually managing people. If you have 3 people on your staff,
Right.
Please don't name someone who's doing your social media the marketing director. It's going to bite you in the butt later. It always does.
Exactly.
Every single time. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So, and yeah, I would totally agree. Like things are changing so fast that like everyone's roles changing, just being honest and upfront about that in the beginning, as opposed to, because then you're just going to get a lot of like, I'm the social media person. I'm like, I don't know why you're asking me to do admin work right now.
Yeah.
So as you're hiring those people, okay.
And if you
So those, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, if your communication isn't really clear, they're going to draw some boundaries on you because you made assumptions. So,
Based on the assumptions you
yeah.
made. Definitely. Okay. So those 3 to 5 people helped you grow to 10 people now. Rules are starting to be a little bit more defined.
Mhm.
What are some common mistakes there?
Boundaries, 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 boundaries. 5 to 10
Mhm.
and even 10 to 15 boundaries is a big thing because in the beginning you're a family, right? You're a little family that's working on this thing called a business that you're trying to see where it's going to go. You've got them on board that it's going to be transitional, but you talk very familiarly. Maybe they've been to your house because that's where you're working. Maybe they've met your kids. Maybe there's some less than ideal communication practices with how we speak to one another, language, tone, all of those things. Perhaps there was no dress code before. Now there's a dress code. All of the different growing pains when it goes from being a little group of friends or family working on a business to an organization. Those are some of the most common things that I see there, because I think that now it's becoming a thing. Like, you have to show up and be professional. You have to set the example. So if you've done that from the beginning, great. You've set the tone and you're going to follow it through. I suggest that you always, again, tie it back to your mission. If you have your mission, your vision in the organization, and you're living that every day with your organization, you're including everybody uh, in that mission and vision and values. As long as you guys are all doing that, then it's a lot easier to make that transition. But being mindful about how, yeah, someone just, who was I talking to? They were just telling me about how, a huge organization, it's like $1 billion family business, where family business I worked in 1 years ago, it was great. It was a lot of fun, but it was not professional at all. Right. I mean, it just, the things that could be said and things, it was great. But then when you start bringing in more people,
Yep,
then you start having problems. Right. And depending on how much of a family business it is, right, how familiar and friendly everybody is, then you really need an HR department, right? Then you really need to be cautious about things, because then you open yourself up for other challenges. So just that
definitely.
transition from family to professional, making sure that you're trying to be intentional all along, because eventually, if that's your goal, if that's where you are going to head, treat it like a business from the beginning.
Definitely. Definitely. All right. And then I want questions from people watching as well, if anyone has any questions. All right. Moving on to 20 people. You are a full-fledged organization. You have those millions coming in, your payroll, you've had to hire someone for your payroll. What are some common mistakes there?
I think at that point, and it might be a bridge from the previous one into this one as well, but I think training and onboarding and making sure when you're bridging to that, when you're bridging up to the 10 to 15, you need to really have your onboarding and your training program locked in. It doesn't have to be perfect. Every time can even be a little bit different, because you're getting feedback from the new employee, asking what was helpful, what wasn't, but really refining those processes. Because I think that onboarding is the most important part. You're bringing them in, you're making sure they know not to make assumptions, you're teaching them about the boundaries, you're making sure that they know how they're going to be successful at their job, which is going to make the team successful and the organization successful. So making sure that you've got that all dialed in, and you've got consistent processes, especially by the time you get to 20. Maybe you've got an HR person that's going to make sure you've got your new manager training, because to your point earlier on, I mean, some people may have never managed somebody. How do you do an interview? Some of the just
Mhm.
the back of the house things that are, if you've worked in other places, then you've probably had that opportunity to learn it. But if you're hiring people that have never managed people before, how to manage, how to lead people, how to provide feedback, how to receive feedback, how to do a performance review, a lot of those really administrative pieces are very important.
Definitely. And Jonathan had a really good question. So what's the best indication that you should start transitioning 1099s to W-2s? So what's the blueprint for that transition? What are best practices? I've hired this VA. I have a couple of VAs. I have a 5 1099s. When do I start transitioning folks into actually being a part of this organization full time?
So that's a really good question. And full transparency, I'm going to tell you that I don't know that I have the industry. This is what should be done. I know I'm in Virginia, and this past year they've made some changes so that we have to have W-2s for our employees for most roles now. We used to be able to do 1099s, and that's shifting. So I've been looking at, how that's going to work. What are the impacts of those things? Because 1099s are really nice. It's easier on the taxes. It lowers the level of overhead. I know for me and the research that I've done, I think it really shifts the gears of how you're going to focus on the forward trajectory. Are you thinking that you're going to stay at 8 to 10 people? Do you really want to do payroll for 8 to 10 people? Are they going to be full time? Are you going to want to do health benefits, insurance, 401k, all of those things? Are you ready for those? How much money do you have in reserve? I mean, there's a lot of different pieces here, at least from the stuff that I've been looking into on what all needs to be in place and how consistently you're earning, projections for going forward, things like that. I'm happy to talk offline, Jonathan, if you want to talk more about, just the things that I've learned about. I don't want to give anybody the wrong information here, because again, that's not my lane. But think about what your long-term plan is. If you're planning on getting to 100 people, right, 100 employees, if that's the size of organization that you're looking to go, where it's going to be a proper corporation or something like that, then obviously you've got a business plan that should have mapped that out. Your milestones, how much revenue, how much savings. Now it's time for employees, moving to the next one, and certainly work with your financial folks.
What about from like a leadership standpoint? I guess if I have 5 1099 employees, is it better? Not like taking financial and like the business side out of it, but from like a cultural leadership standpoint, does it matter?
I think I don't want to say control, because I don't think that's you'll have more impact and you'll have more ability to shape your employees, I think, if they're W-2s, because they're employees of your business, right? You're not partnering with anybody, and you're not having any external like 1099 is a lot of time, maybe they have a side business, or maybe they're what is it called? Fractional, doing like multiple things, right? You're not their one and only. So you'll get a lot more devoted focus, I think, when you have W-2s. You can put them through your onboarding process. You can put them through your training. You can make sure that they're bought in and they're who you want for the role. They've got that security that they've got a job now, and they're coming to work for you, and they're going to be about your mission, not their mission anymore. So I think from that perspective, yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that would be ideal. Plus, I mean, I think I look at it from a stress point, because now you're responsible for these people's livelihoods, right? So I look at it that way, and wanting to make sure that you do right by the folks, but you also get the added benefit that then they are truly on board with you.
Definitely. Okay, I want to give you time to talk about your books. So you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes. So the assumptions, boundaries, and communication, I don't know if you can see it on here. Get it in front of my face, so it won't. But so that it's on LinkedIn. You can see it on my profile, Maximizing Team Performance by Mastering Your ABCs. It talks a lot about the assumptions, boundaries, communications. There's an exercise in the book that will actually, I think there's 8 case studies that I give, where I walk you through kind of the worst case scenario, real life scenarios that I've experienced through my years of work, where assumptions, boundaries, or communications have gone haywire. And then we talk about questions to kind of reflect back and brainstorm, figure out, diagnose where the problems are. And then I give another scenario where it's optimized, where we've applied those principles, those leadership principles in there. So there's a lot of good functional stuff in there, I think, because there's scenarios that many of us have probably experienced and think back and say, oh, well, okay, got that.
Yeah.
And then the new one coming out is about leading yourself. I just got the cover finished, so I'll
Ooh.
be announcing that probably next week. That just came back from the editor today, so I have to go through and work on that. I'm expecting fall launch, so I'm actually looking for people that might be interested to be a pre-reader. So if anybody, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn about that. I'd love to get some folks to read it out in advance and give me their feedback.
That's so cool. So cool. We'll definitely do that. Awesome. Well, you're in Founders Community, so anyone who wants to hear more can obviously reach out to you in Founders Community. In Founders Community, we have multiple weekly networking sessions where you can interact with people like Kelly and ask those questions specific to your business. And then we host a weekly talk just like this. So if anyone wants to join Founders Community, please do at founders-community.com. And then obviously reach out to Kelly. I'm selfishly going to continue to pick Kelly's brain offline, but you all have to go to running your businesses. So thank you so much, Kelly. And we will talk to you soon.